Hey, everybody. Welcome to Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. Glad you could be with us again this week as we sit and study a little scripture and talk about it a little bit. I'll be using the daily lectionary text for today, Wednesday, September 9th. And today's text comes to us in the Gospel of Matthew, the 21st chapter, verses 18 to 22. In the morning, when Jesus returned to the city, he was hungry, and seeing a fig tree by the side of the road, he went to it and found nothing on it at all but leaves. Then he said to it, "May no fruit ever come from you again." And the fig tree withered at once. When the disciples saw it, they were amazed, saying, "How did the fig tree wither at once?" And Jesus answered them, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only will you do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, 'Be lifted up and thrown into the sea,' it will be done. Whatever you ask for in prayer with faith, you will receive." It's funny when I usually hear this story, first thing comes to my mind, and I've heard other people ask it is, what did this poor fig tree ever do to Jesus? The cursing of the fig tree is familiar, and yet it can be a problematic passage sometimes for some people because they want to know again, why is Jesus cursing this poor fig tree? Why is Jesus having this temper tantrum in the middle of nowhere? It seems, and many people hear this story and think this just doesn't seem to fit into the Jesus whom they see in the rest of the Gospels. And of course, atheists and other critics of the Bible are happy to point out this passage and tell us that simply Jesus is doing just that, throwing a temper tantrum here, and is hardly someone who's worth emulating and following. But this story has so much more to offer than what the critics can imagine. First of all, there is something to be said here. The fig tree incident must be seen along with the account of the cleansing of the temple. This is the 21st chapter of Matthew. We are deep into Matthew now, and this story about the fig tree immediately follows the cleansing of the temple, the flipping over of the tables, which once again have been perceived as a temper tantrum on Jesus's part. But both of these episodes really have to do with judgment on Israel. The Old Testament Israel is at times referred to as a fig tree, with judgment on Israel often described in terms of fig trees, whether it's Isaiah or Hosea or the Psalms or Jeremiah or Micah or so on. So there is no question that this definitely has a symbolic nature to it, involving the nature of Israel, nation of Israel. Sorry. Indeed, it is. It's almost like an enacted parable right before our eyes. It is telling us that Israel, and especially Israel's leadership, has failed to show any genuine spiritual fruit, and because of this, judgment must come. It has nothing to do with Jesus being cranky or impatient or didn't get a good night's sleep, and it has more to do with the fig tree being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was yet another warning to Israel that their refusal to receive their Messiah meant judgment was coming. So what have we here is nothing to do with a childish or a temperamental Jesus, but a very important warning, acted out most graphically on this fig tree. Israel's in a very precarious position indeed, and it is in need of an urgent wake-up call, lest it would be too late. The presence of the fig tree was considered to be a symbol of blessing and prosperity in the nation of Israel. So it withering would do the exact opposite. It would represent the absence and death um, of and symbolize judgment and rejection. Symbolically, again, the fig tree represented the spiritual deadness of Israel, who, while very religious outwardly, with all the sacrifices and the ceremonies that were being done, they were spiritually barren because of all of their sins. By cleansing the temple and cursing the fig tree, causing it to wither and die, Jesus was pronouncing his coming and the judgment upon Israel and demonstrating his power to carry it out. But it also teaches us the principle that religious profession and observance are not enough to guarantee us salvation. We were being told that unless there is fruit of genuine salvation that is evidenced in the life of the person, James would later echo this when he wrote the words, "Faith without works is dead." The lesson of the fig tree is that we should bear spiritual fruit, not just give appearance to being religious. God judges fruitfulness and expects those who have a relationship with him to bear much fruit, is what we hear about in John. So Israel, and especially the leaders of Israel, had been given much, but fruit was not forthcoming. So the only appropriate thing to do was to warn them of imminent judgment. The continued rejection of Jesus, along with continued rejection of the prophets of old, had shown just how far removed Israel had become from the intended purpose. And if we think that what a pathetic lot the Israelites were, we need to take a little bit of warning ourselves. Similar things can be said about the church today. And indeed, Jesus made it clear that if we are not bearing fruit, we are headed for a similar judgment. If we belong to Jesus, we will produce spiritual fruit. And if we do not, we do not belong to him. So we too must pay careful attention here. If Israel of old can fail to measure up, so too can we. We're not that special. Thus, this story serves as an important warning to us all. But this isn't all about doom and gloom, because Jesus did say, if you have faith, then you literally can move mountains. We often forget about the rest of this passage. But there is good news in reminding us that God has given us all gifts to help each other along the way, to hold us accountable and to support one another in our endeavors to make this world a better place. Because the story of the fig tree is not a temper tantrum by God, but it is a learning opportunity. I hope maybe this reflection might help you see this text in a little different way this week. I look forward to seeing you next week as well. But again, until then, take care of yourselves and each other.